Hey, what's up everyone? In today's video we will talk about a Paladin's AOE farming build. Now the idea of this video all started with a simple question. Is such a build possible for the Paladin class? So I did some research around the web and I worked with the talent calculator and the database to see if it could be possible. Now I must say that Kargoz's video on the Paladin Warlock dual leveling comp was a lot of help, and it sparked the idea in my head, and it also focused my research on a build that would be built around reflecting damage back to the attacker. Afterwards I gathered all the elements together and started doing some testing of this interesting new build, and what I found out is quite surprising. So in this video we will start with the build itself in the talent calculator, as it all starts there, and then we will go over the items that complement the build, and we'll discuss which item are mandatory and those that are more optional. We will also go over two different sets of gears that you can use to make this build viable, with the first one being an entry-level set of gear that is going to be pretty much only pre-read best in slots that is easily obtained, and then a second one that is a more garnished one that will require more time to build, but that will yield much more rewards. And then we'll go over some more practical tips such as gameplay tips and then convenient grinding spots, as for this build you will see that you will mostly shine in areas where there are a lot of melee mobs. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So here we are in the talent calculator and we will just lay the foundation for this awesome build. So obviously it's a no-brainer here, we will need consecration because we want to do AoE farming, so we want to deal AoE damage, and this is going to be a very key component of the build. And we take some very good talents along the way with this. We have Divine Intellect, which increases your intellect. It's a lot better than Divine Strength because a Paladin without mana is a very sad Paladin, it's a very useless Paladin, so obviously you want to get as much intellect as you can, and Strength is very easy to get by on plate gear, but Intellect not as much, so very important to go with Divine Intellect. Then we get with Spiritual Focus. It's very good because it reduces the chance to lose casting time when taking damage by 70%, and when you are going to play with this build you want to always pull 5 to 10 enemies at the time, because less than that you're not being efficient enough, and over 10 mobs you are going to run into problems. But between 5 and 10 NPCs attacking you, it's going to be obviously very hard to cast spell, especially if you want to heal yourself with the Holy Light. But with this talent, it's actually going to be very good because you won't have to wait for like 2.5 years for your healing to go off, so it's going to be very good. And on top of that, if you pair it with Concentration Aura, you get a 100% chance not to lose casting time, so then your 2.5 second spell casting time is going to be 2.5 seconds, it's not going to be any longer than that. Two very strong talents that we take along the way to get Consecration. Now, a second key component of the build is going to be Blessing of Sanctuary. So we go with Redoubt.
What? Redoubt again? I thought we already talked about how bad it was.
Well, I mean, Redoubt is not all that bad in that situation because, like I said, you're going to be facing many different enemies at the same time, so you will get in a decent uptime on that talent, but it's really for shield specialization that you take it, and you're not going to use Devotion Aura anyway, so you don't have the choice but to take Redoubt. Then you want to get Precision. 3% to hit with your melee weapons is going to be very good because you want your auto attacks to land to get your procs of Seal of Righteousness, Seal of Light, and then Seal of Wisdom. Then Guardian's Favor, I'm a big advocate of that talent, but if you don't like it, you can put the points somewhere else, but relying on a 3-minute cooldown for your Blessing of Protection is going to be a lot better than relying on a 5-minute cooldown, because, you know, it's one of your many oh shit buttons, and you want to get it as low of a cooldown as possible. Then we get 4 out of 5 toughness points because we want to get added armor, obviously, it's self-explanatory. Then 3 out of 3 shield specialization, more damage absorbed when you block, self-explanatory as well. Reduced cooldown on your Hammer of Justice, just to be able to rely on your CC more often. It can be the difference between you dying and you surviving a pull, especially if you ass pull by accident or something. And then Blessing of Sanctuary.
People seem to forget how good that one is.
Yes, people tend to forget it. Well, it's not necessarily that they tend to forget it, but I think it's just it's too deep into the protection tree that you cannot choose that Blessing and Holy Shock or Repentance, and most Paladins will want to get those 31 talent points, so they cannot take Blessing of Sanctuary by default in that situation, but it's super strong. Let's just go over the why it is. So, places a blessing on a friendly target, reducing damage dealt from all sources by up to 10 for 5 minutes. In addition, when the target blocks a melee attack, the attacker will take 14 holy damage. Let's just take the rank 1 just to explain why it's so good. So every time you take damage, you will reduce that damage by 10. So obviously it's a lot better if you take a lot of small hits repeatedly rather than slower, bigger hits. So obviously if you take 1000 damage in one hit, you just reduce that damage by 10, but if you take 1000 damage over 100 hits, or actually that would be 0 damage, but over 25 hits, well, you reduce the damage by 10 25 times, so you reduce the damage by 25, 250, my god, 250, so you reduce the damage by 25% compared to only 1%. So you get a lot more value by being attacked often, and this is what you will be asking for by pulling many different low-level mobs up to you. So you get a lot of value out of this blessing, and even if you use the standard Blizzard UI where it only shows you 2 rows of buffs and you don't see your Blessing of Sanctuary and those 2 rows of buff, you will realize when you have it on and when you don't, because when you have it on, everything goes well, but when you don't have it on, you will realize, why am I taking so much damage? Then you will see, oh, that's because I don't have Blessing of Sanctuary. So Blessing of Sanctuary, very good. The Greater Blessing is the highest rank that you can get of Blessing of Sanctuary, and I think it reduces damage by 24 every time you take a hit, and then it reflects 35 holy damage, so very good. And on top of that reduced damage, you get an extra thorn effect so when you block, so it's obviously very good. Then we go into the Retribution tree, take 5 out of 5 Benediction because it reduces the mana cost of your Judgment and your seal spells, and you're going to be casting a lot of those spells just to refresh your seals and reapply debuffs and stuff like that, so that's a great way to be very efficient with your mana. And then Improved Judgment, just like Improved Hammer of Justice, you want to rely on a shorter cooldown for a quite important spell. Then 3 out of 5 Deflection for some increased defensive stats. Then 2 out of 2 Pursuit of Justice. It's going to be very important because it increases your movement and mounted movement speed by 8%, so you get everywhere 8% faster, you're more efficient, and you will see with your epic mount that 8% makes you go very fast.
It also allows you to get back to the end
5
faster.
5 out of 5 Conviction, this is the best way to use your talent because Vindication is kind of meh, especially on the private server that I'm playing on. Sometimes it just never procs, so I don't know on the classic servers how it's going to behave, but I mean, I think Conviction is going to be better, and at the same time, an eye for an eye is not necessary here because you want to avoid casters like the Plague, or I mean, as much as possible. Then 2 out of 2 Improved Retribution Aura. This is going to be very strong because it increases damage done by your Retribution Aura by 50%. At level 60, Retribution Aura reflects 20 damage back to the attacker. Now it's going to be 30 damage, so you get a lot of value out of that, especially, like I said, if you're getting attacked by 5 to 10 mobs and they attack you quite often. So there's a lot of synergy between all of those key talents: Improved Retribution Aura, Blessing of Sanctuary, and Consecration. Now, a question that you might have is, why are we not taking Holy Shield? I mean, it's kind of a 31 talent point, it should be a very good talent, but let's explain why it's not a very good talent to take. So, first of all, you need to put more points into the protection tree, and you don't have all that many good options. I mean, you have Reckoning, that's kind of meh, especially since you cannot proc it yourself. Increased damage with one-handers is not that bad, but then when you finally get to Holy Shield, that means you can get Improved Retribution Aura, Pursuit of Justice, Conviction, and some points in the second tier as well. But when you finally get to Holy Shield, you might think, oh yes, this is worthwhile. Not all that much, because let's go through it together. Increases your chance to block by 30% for 10 seconds, you know, by itself it doesn't look all that bad, and deals 65 holy damage for each attack blocked while active. And then it deals additional threat, but it doesn't really matter in this situation because you're either going to be soloing, or if you are more than one to AoE farm like this, mobs are going to be dying very fast, so you don't have to worry about threat at all. The problem is that, first of all, it costs mana, especially the latest rank of it costs like 100 or 200 mana, something like that, and it's quite mana hungry, and you're going to be using your Consecration quite often, your seals, your judgment, your heals. Just adding another mana hungry ability to your rotation is not the best thing in the world, and at the same time it doesn't increases your chance to block by an amount that is enough to justify its use, because you only deal damage with that ability when you do block, so it's potential damage, it's not guaranteed damage, and I mean, you cannot rely all that much on redoubt. and then you can sort of rely on the 30% from Holy Shield, but like I said, you need to use it every 10 seconds, and it's going to drain a lot of mana, and if in some cases the RNGs are not in your favor, you will be using a lot of mana for a very low ROI. I mean, it's just better to go with Improved Retribution Aura, which is a guaranteed source of damage, and like I said, you're gonna have so much damage that come from this talent alone, because you're gonna have 5 to 10 mobs attacking you over and over and over, that they are gonna slowly kill themselves by attacking you. So that's it for the build itself. Now let's go into the stat priority before jumping into what gears that you can take to make this build work. I mean, first and foremost, it's not a very big surprise here. It's going to be stamina for surviving the onslaught. You're going to be attacking a lot of people at the same time, so you want to be able to have a large enough health pool so that you can actually make it work.
Yeah, and you never know when a rogue is going to try to screw up your day, so always be prepared.
Yes, absolutely. Always be prepared to be ganked by a rogue, but as well, the grinding spots that I'm going to show you a little bit later on in this video some of them are well known, so it's going to be contested, or there's going to be a horde around, and especially in the Western Plagueland, I mean, the Bulwark and Terrasfall Glades is just right beside you. I mean, it's not very far for a horde player to just come to Sorrow Hill and just start messing up with your AoE farming, so by having a lot more stam, you put the odds more in your favor to survive. Then the second stat is going to be Intellect / Spell Power, obviously for a bigger mana pool, and so your spells can hit harder. I mean, this is a no-brainer. Like I said earlier, a paladin without mana is a sad paladin. It's a paladin that is not achieving all its potential, and therefore Intellect is going to be one of your best friend in terms of stats, and at the same time spell power, so your spells hit harder. I mean, you're gonna get a lot of value for your consecration, because if you're attacking 5 to 10 mobs at the same time, you get a lot more value out of that increased spell power. And at the same time, if you're fighting undeads, well, you get a lot of punching power and your exorcism, so it's going to be very important. In third place, you have Strength and MP5, so obviously Strength for more damage with your melee attacks and for more shield block value, and then MP5 is going to be for sustainability, mana-wise. Because you're not using Blessing of Wisdom, which is an amazing blessing to help you with your sustainability, you have to take Blessing of Sanctuary, otherwise you won't be able to make this build work. Well, that affects your sustainability obviously, but by having a little bit of MP5 on your gears, especially in a situation where you are going to use the entry-level set of gears that we will discuss just right after this, it's going to help you bridge the gap. But once you get your tier 2 set and then you start getting AQ or Naxxramas gears, I mean, this won't be a problem anymore, because your tier 2 set has built-in mana per 5, but in the meantime it's always going to be a priority on your gears. Then in fourth place you have Reflect damage items. I mean, this is going to be dealing an insane amount of passive damage, especially if you start stacking all those items together, and the longer the fights, obviously the more value you get, and the longer that you will be farming. If you farm for 2 hours, let's say, or 1 hour even, I mean, you will see that it's going to be very different with or without those Reflect damage items, so it's going to be very important. And like I said in the build at the beginning, it's going to be focused on reflecting damage, so you have Consecration that deals damage around you, Retribution Aura, you have your Shield Spike, you will have your Blessing of Sanctuary when you block, and then you will have your Reflect items, so you will be dealing a lot of damage to everybody that is around you. And that's the main idea of the build. And then in fifth place is going to be Defense, if you have a slot for extra stats, obviously for extra survivability. And now let's get into the 2 sets of gears that I have prepared for you. The first one is going to be an entry-level set to get this build going as soon as possible. Alright, now, so let's talk about what types of gears can you expect to be wearing if you want to make this build work. Now, we will start with a entry-level set of gears, so let's get into it. So the 4-man's head protector, which is going to be your headpiece, plate, has strength, stamina, intellect, and spell power on it. This is the best type of gears that you can get very early on, because there's not a lot of those around before you get into your tier 2 set. For your necklace, Tooth of Nar is very nice, stam, intellect, and mana per 5, all very good stats. Your light forged spolders, which obviously are going to be rather easy to get, and they are your set pieces, so they give you all the stats that you need. They don't give you green stats, but still very nice stats. Strength, agility, stam, intellect, and spirit. Obviously very cool. Then for your cape, Archivist Cape of the Eagle, 9 intellect, 9 stamina, and 4 mana per 5 seconds. Now just a little note about this cape, it always comes with 4 mana per 5 seconds, The only thing that will be different from one cape to another, because there's many different versions of it, is the stats that are on it. And if you're lucky enough, hopefully you can get the one of the eagle for intellect and stam. For your chest piece, your Lifeforged breastplate, obviously, first of all, it's going to be your second piece of the set, so you will get a set bonus with that. And like I said, for the first item, it gives you a lot of good stats: strength, stam, intellect, and spirit. Then for your wrists, Lifeforged bracers for the same reason. Then for your hands, you could go with Reaver claws, strength, stamina, and increased chance to critical strike by 1%. Now for your waist, you could go with the Feral Surge girdle, which is a male item with stamina, intellect, and mana for 5. Now if you want to go for male items, you can, but you want to limit those as much as possible, and you want them to have a purpose. If they are a male item, it's because they have some very good stats on them, maybe a lot of mana per 5, a lot of spell power, and a lot of good stats, either intellect, strength, or stamina. You don't want to choose, obviously, a male piece just because it's a male piece, because otherwise it will just hurt your survivability because it doesn't give as much armor as a plate item. Now for your leg plates, the Chitinous plate leg guards, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but this is another very good piece of gear because there's not a lot of those early on. Plate, stam, intellect, lots of those, and then restore mana per 5 seconds, obviously very good. Now our fourth piece of the set, for your feet, for your Lifeforged boots, strength, stamina, and then spirit, and because it's your fourth piece, obviously you will get the increased attack power from it. Now for your ring, you can go with the Emperor's Seal of Concentration. Now, just like the cape, the Emperor's Seal will come in many different forms. You can get other stats on it, but hopefully you can get the one with mana per 5 seconds, or you can get the one with stam and intellect. I think there's one of the eagle, or stamina and spirit, but hopefully you can get the one with mana per 5 for more sustainability, obviously. Now for your second ring, you will definitely want to have Nagel ring, but we will discuss this ring just a little bit later. For your trinkets, I'll give you some ideas because there's so many trinkets that are good for this build, but just an example would be probably Second Wind. This is a quite easy trinket to get, and if you're already a healer, you might already have this one, so it's not going to be that hard to fill in all the other slots, and it's very good because it has an active use and then a passive use. Then another idea would be probably Heart of the Scale, increase the amounts of buffs that reflect damage to the attacker. For your shield, believe it or not, Thermoplug Central Core is a very good starting item, and we will discuss it just like the other items just a little bit later. And last but not least, for your weapon, you can take anything as long as it's a blue item and it's around level 60 at least. It doesn't matter if it's a DPS, healing, or tanking weapon, just as long as you have the best weapon that you have at that point. It just allows you to make sure that you have decent damage and to make sure that you can get your procs from your seals. Alright, so now let's go with the second set of gears, which is probably the one that you want to aim for if you really want to make this build work like a charm, and if you want to get the job done and look badass as while doing it. So obviously I won't need to go through every single piece, but you will have your full judgment set. This is the best set of gears in terms of multi-purposeness, that's even a word, because first of all, it's a full set of plate gear, so you get the most amount of armor that you can have access to, and then you have a lot of strength, a lot of stamina, a lot of intellect. You can get some spirit on some items, you get resistances on top of that, and I'm not even done yet. You can get spell power, not spell healing, but spell power, which is fantastic, obviously, and on some pieces, you will here and there, you will also get mana per 5. I mean, this is everything that you could be hoping for. Then maybe later on you would get, let's say, a Charm of the Shifting Sands from AQ, Stam, Intellect, and Spell Power. It's obviously very good. Maybe if you're lucky enough, you would get a Cloak of Flames, which deals 5 fire damage back to anyone who strikes you with a melee attack. But this one might be hard to get because it's a rare drop from dungeons and raid mobs, so don't bet too much money on this one, but it's obviously very good if you can get your hands on this one. Then let's see, for your rings, you might have a Ring of Blackrock from Blackwing Lair eventually with spell power and mana per 5 seconds, and you would still be rocking your Nagel ring because it's obviously a very good piece of armor. And then in terms of trinket, what you would want to have eventually is the Essence of the Pure Flame, which drops from Ragnaros, and I've heard a lot of good tanks talk shit about that item, talking about that it's a very bad item, so you might have the chance to get your hands on one of those rather early, but at the same time, remember that you don't want to start ninja rolling on the items that might be more beneficial to the tanks or the healers in your guild, okay? Always, or the DPS, always remember that. Be a good student, be patient, and eventually the gears will come to you, but don't try to ninja loot items because then you will have a bad reputation. And then maybe by that time you could hopefully get a Dark Moon card Maelstrom to have a chance to strike your melee target with lightning for 200 to 300 nature damage. Now in terms of weapon, I mean the best case scenario would be to have an Iron Foe and then a Skull Flame shield, but we will get back to the shield a little bit later. Iron Foe, I mean you will have to be very lucky because a lot of different classes are going to want that item. It's very good because it has a chance to give you 2 extra attack on your next swing, so it's obviously very good to proc your Judgments of Light or Judgment of Wisdom, and then your Seals, whatever the one that you will be using. So this is the dream build, makes you look good, makes you get the job done, and this is what eventually that you will want to have. Oh, and in terms of the tabard, you will want to have the Stormpike Battle Tabard because it just matches with the color scheme of the rest of your set. Now we will go over more details about the specific items that you will want to have to make this build work, and what are the other miscellaneous items, or what are all the choices of trinkets, for example, that you can have access to. So let's get into it. Alright, let's get started with the shield. Now, believe it or not, Thermoplug's Central Core is going to be a fantastic shield to start with because it's very easy to farm, and it also drops off a boss that drops another very good item that we will go over later. So Mechgineer Thermoplug is really our plug for this build. And I mean, if you look at everything that's on this shield, obviously, you might start by looking at these raw stats and look at the armor, the block, and the spirit on it and be like, ew, that's a bad shield, why would you use it? Well, the main reason is for the green text on it. When struck in combat, has a 5% chance of inflicting 35 to 66 nature damage to the attacker. This is the highest proc rate that you can get from a shield that will deal damage back to the attacker that way, maybe beside the force reactive disc that is every time you block, but it's very good. I mean, all the others are going to have like a 1% chance to get the bonus, a 3% chance or such, so this is one of the highest proc rate that you can get. It's very easy to farm, and on top of that, if you didn't know that proc, the green text, is the exact same proc rate that you can get on a Grand Marshal Aegis. Yes, the item that you can only get once you reach rank 14 in PvP. Now obviously this shield will have a lot more armor, a lot more block and stamina and other very nice stats on it, but for the green text part, it's exactly the same. So it's obviously going to be very good. Just strap on a thorium shield spike on it and you're going to be good to go. It's very easy to get started. Now, if you're a little bit more lucky, you might get your hands on the green tower, which is a world drop. It's a epic item, requires level 36, so it's about in the same range. I mean, in terms of the raw stats on it, it's not that bad, but you get 13 stamina, so that's always very nice. But the green text is what is interesting here, obviously. When struck in combat, has a 1% chance of raising a thorny shield that inflicts 3 nature damage to attackers when hit, and increases nature resistance by 50 for 30 seconds. Now, the uptime on this shield is not all that bad because the proc lasts 30 seconds, and in 30 seconds you have more than enough time to get another proc off of this if you're pulling enough mobs at the same time. So during my testing, I could get anything from close to 100% uptime, and the lowest uptime that I had was give or take about 40-50%. So not a bad choice if you have access to this shield. Now we get to a little higher level. Now you can also get your hands on the Argent Defender. Reasonable amount of armor, reasonable amount of block, has a 1% chance when struck in combat of increasing your chance to block by 50% for 10 seconds. Now it's not the best thing in the world, but still being able to increase your chance to block is obviously going to be very good for the damage aspect of your Blessing of Sanctuary, and also for your Thorium Shield Spike on your shield. Now you get this item through a little quest line. You need to go and complete the Archivist quest, then you need to complete the quest where you need to bring the head of Balnazar to Light's Hope, then the head of Baron Rivendare. Then after you've completed those 2 quests, you then go and talk to Lord Maxwell Tyrosis in the Light's Hope Chapel, and then he will give you a quest that will have 3 quest reward, and this shield is one of the rewards. So if you ever happen to have this shield on you, you can use this one if you don't have anything better. Now, another good shield that you could get is the Crest of Retribution from Ramstein the Gorger in Stratholme Undead. Decent amount of block and armor as well, and then deals 5 to 36 damage every time you block. So it already has a built-in thorn damage on it, but you can increase it even more with the Thorium Shield Spike on top of that. Now we get into the big boys range. So one shield that you could get is the Drill Borer Disc from Gar in Molten Core. Very good raw stats on the item, and then has a lot of green text on it, so it's very nice. When struck in combat, inflicts 3 arcane damage to the attacker, so it's not about blocking or anything, it's just a pure thorn effect. Obviously very good, increases your chance to block, very good as well, and your shield block value. But as always, don't roll on it before the tank do, or before the tanks already have that or something better. Now the famous Skull Flame Shield, obviously it's very good armor, very good block, some resistances on top of that, and then 2 green text on it. When struck in combat, has a 3% chance to steal 35 life from the target enemy. So obviously you deal 35 damage and then you heal for 35, so that's obviously very cool. And then the most important part of that whole shield is when struck in combat, has a 1% chance of dealing 75 to 126 fire damage to all targets around you. So it's a thorn effect, but that will affect obviously everybody around you. So it's obviously a lot better than only reflecting damage to the one mob that has been attacking you individually. Now, if you really want to force it, or you really have a lot of gold to just throw away at this build, you could go with the Force Reactive Disc. If you don't already have one, don't bother, but if you have one already, I mean, it's very nice, because when the shield blocks, it releases an electrical charge that damages all nearby enemies. So just like a Skull Flame Shield, it's very nice AoE damage. But it also has, I think it's a 50% chance of damaging the shield while doing so. So if you're going to be farming a lot and going to be farming away from NPCs that can repair, it's not going to be the best shield to use. And on top of that, even if you are beside NPCs that can repair your gears, I mean, it can cost a lot of gold to repair that shield, so it might not be the best to get, but if you want to try it and see how it goes for you, definitely you can give it a try. Alright, so now we will go over the many different trinkets that you can use with this build, and we will start with the ones that have a passive or a mix of a passive and an active use on them, and then we will go finally with the ones that only have an active use. So the first one that we have here is Briarwood Reed, a very nice little trinket as it increases your spell power by 29, and it will drop off Jed Rune Watcher in UBRS with a 33% chance to drop, so very nice. But just be aware that all healers and casters will want to roll on it, so you might not get it right away if it drops. So another nice trinket to have is Rune of the Dawn if you plan on farming undeads in the Plaguelands, as it will allow you to get the Scourge Stones to turn them in for your Argent Dawn reputation, and it increases the damage done to undeads by magical spells and effect by up to 48. In the case of a Paladin, I would say that this one is a lot better than the Seal of the Dawn that increases attack power by 81. When fighting undeads. Another cool trinket that you could get is Burst of Knowledge. Has both an on-use and passive effect, so the on-use reduces the mana cost of all spells by 100 for 10 seconds with a very long cooldown, but still it's very nice. And the passive is increasing the healing done by magical spells and effect by 12. And this one will drop off Ambassador Flame Lash. Then Uther's Strength is a nice little trinket to have as well. You can get it from a roll drop, so it will be quite random, and it has a 2% chance when struck in combat of protecting you with a Holy Shield. And compared to other classes such as Warriors and Druids in Bear form, you do not have any penalties from having a shield that absorbs damage on you, so it's obviously very nice. And because you're going to be hit quite often while AoE farming, you will have a nice uptime on this little Holy Shield. Then another very nice one would be Second Wind of Golem Lord Engelmark in Blackrock Depths. Has both an unused and a passive one. The unused restores 30 mana every 1 second for 10 seconds, and the passive increases your healing by 22. Then Essence of the Pure Flame is going to be one that you will eventually want to have if you really want to get the maximum out of this build, and it drops off Ragnaros. When struck in combat, inflicts 13 fire damage to the attacker. So this is going to be one of the highest source of thorn damage that you can deal back to the enemy, and because it's when struck in combat, it's always going to proc when you are getting hit, so it's very nice. And like I said, I've talked to a lot of good tanks on my server, and a lot of them have told me that this is a very bad tanking trinket, apparently, but I don't know, I haven't been in this situation myself, but that might mean that you could get access to this trinket rather early in the progression, but at the same time, always remember that you do not want to ninja roll or ninja loot the tank and the healers and the DPS in your raids, okay? Always want to be patient and wait for the gears to be available to you without hurting your reputation. But eventually, this one is going to be a very nice trinket to have. And eventually you might get your hands on a Dark Moon card, Heroism, which you get from the quest Dark Moon Warlords deck, and it sometimes heals the bearer of 120 to 181 damage when damaging an enemy in melee. So very cool. Or a Dark Moon card, Maelstrom, from the Dark Moon Elementals deck, that give you a chance to strike your melee target with lightning for 200 to 300 nature damage. So obviously a nice little added damage bonus on top of that. Now we get into the trinkets that have an on-use effect. Smoky's Lighter could be a very nice one, deals 125 damage to all targets in a cone in front of the caster. So you get obviously a lot more value out of that if you are facing many different enemies. And you get this quest from the Great Fras Sayabi, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, which is a quest that you will get in Light Hope's Chapel and that will be completed in Stratholme. Then Ragged John's Never Ending Cup is also a very nice one.
If only my beers could be just like this.
It increases your stamina by 10 and reduces physical damage taken by 5 for 10 minutes, so it is like a mini Blessing of Sanctuary, and you also get stamina on top of that. It will reduce your strength and agility by 5, which is not that big of a deal, and also increase magical damage taken by up to 20, but the whole idea of this build is to avoid casters as much as possible and face enemies that will attack you in melee, so you will get the most out of this trinket if you do it correctly. And you get this trinket by completing Mother's Milk, which is a quest that you get from Ragged John in the Burning Steppes. Then Smolderweb's Eye is also a very nice little trinket that you can get your hands on, which poisons the target for 20 nature damage every 2 seconds for 20 seconds. So this trinket is going to be used if you want to make sure that one single enemy goes down a lot faster than the other. So if you're ever farming and you see a rare, or there's a caster in the group of melee enemies that you are pulling, you want to use that trinket on that caster to make sure that this one dies as fast as possible. And you get it from Mother Smolderweb in Lower Blackrock Spire. Now, another cool one that you can get is Chained Essence of Aranicus. It poisons all enemies in an 8-yard radius around the caster. Victims of the poison suffer 50 nature damage every 5 seconds for 45 seconds. So you get that one from the quest, the Essence of Aranicus, that you can complete in Sunken Temple, and you might even have this trinket even before you're level 60, so definitely keep it in your bags as it can be very handy later on in the future. Another cool trinket to have is Rammstein Lightning Bolt. Harness the power of lightning to strike down all enemies around you for 200 nature damage, and it drops from Rammstein the Gorger in Stratholme Undead. Then Heart of the Scale increases fire resistance by 20 and deals 20 fire damage to anyone who strikes you with a melee attack for 5 minutes, so a very nice buff to use before you pull, and then once you have used this trinket, then you can replace that one with a passive one. And you will get this trinket from Overlord Wormthalak, which is the last boss in UBRS. And last but not least, the Fetish of Chitinous Spikes, if I'm pronouncing that right. Spikes sprout from you, causing 25 nature damage to attackers when hit, last 30 seconds. And you get that trinket from Buru the Gorger, which is a boss in AQ. So now we are done with all the trinkets. Now we will also go over 4 miscellaneous items that if you can get your hands on, definitely do. And the first one is very easy to get, like we said earlier. It's going to drop off Micgineer Thermoplug in Gnomeregan, so very easy to farm obviously. And it is the Electromagnetic Gigaflux Reactivator.
Gotta love the gnomes for their inventions.
Just the name sounds cool. And the very important part of that item is the green text. Channels a bolt of lightning and hurls it towards all enemies in front of the caster, causing blah 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 nature damage. But this is not the important part. The most important part is the caster is then surrounded by a barrier of electricity for 10 minutes. It will give you a 10-minute buff that will reflect 5 nature damage back to anybody who strikes you in melee. It's kind of a little lightning shield, so it's very nice. It has a very long cooldown for the duration, but if you can get your hands on this, definitely do it. I mean, you more than likely are going to if you are farming Gnomeregan with a friend, either for manual crowd pummelers or for this build while farming the Thermoplug Central Core. So definitely get those 2 items off Thermoplugs because they are very nice and they pair very well together. Now another piece of gear that you could get eventually are Razor Gauntlets, Plate, Gloves, 8 Strength, and when struck in combat inflicts 3 arcane damage back to the attacker, so a little bit like a Nagel Ring. But the only thing that you want to be aware of is that it drops off Alzin, the Wild Shaper, in Dire Maul, so it's not going to be available before Phase 2, when Dire Maul is released. Now let's go over Nagel Ring. This piece of gear is very cool because first of all it's a ring and all the stats that it has on are very cool. So increased armor, increased stamina, increased defense, and most importantly, when struck in combat, inflicts 3 arcane damage to the attacker. So it goes along very well with the whole idea of the build where you want to reflect damage back to the attacker, and you can get this ring off Golem Lord Argolmac in Blackrock Depths. And then last but not least, for the miscellaneous items, the Cloak of Flame is an amazing item that you can get your hands on if ever you do. It's a back piece, 50 armor, 15 fire resist, and deals 5 fire damage to anyone who strikes you with a melee attack. So again, it goes very well with the whole idea of the reflect damage. But the only problem with this is that it's a rare drop from mobs in raids and dungeons, so it's a little bit harder to get your hands on. I've personally seen it only drop once in OBRS, so it might be very rare to get or it might be very expensive to buy. But if you can get that piece of armor, this is going to help you because, as we said, if you start stacking a lot of reflect damage on top of all your consumables, on top of all your spells, and on top of all the other tool that you have in your toolkit, you will make this build work very well. So that's it for the part of the gears. Now we will go over the many different consumables that you can use to make your life a whole lot easier. But note that the consumables that we will go over are not the best in their category, because the whole idea of this build is to make it viable with the least amount of resources. I mean, if it required Naxxramas Best in Slot gears, a Thunder Fury, a Flask, and the blood of your mother to make it work, then it wouldn't really make sense for me to show you that build. But at the same time, if you have access to more or better consumables than the ones that I'm about to show you, then you can definitely use them. Knock yourself out. Alright, so the first one on the list is the Crystal Spire, which is a consumable that I discovered while researching for this build. I didn't know about that beforehand. So what it does is surrounds the friendly target with a crystal shield, doing 12 damage to anyone who hits him. Lasts 10 minutes, 5 minute cooldown, so you can get a 100% uptime with those items, which is very nice because it's like your personal little lightning shield. For an alliance player, it's obviously very cool to have. How do you get this? Well, it's quite easy. When you get in Ungoro for the first time, you have to pick up, I think it's 7 power crystals of every color. Then once you get to Martial Refugee, at the back there's a cave, and at the end of the cave there's a little gnome, and then you turn in your power crystals. Then she will give you 3 quests, one for the western, one for the northern, and one for the eastern pylon. When you discover every single pylon, you get back to her, and then she will give you a quest making sense of it. Then after a couple seconds, she will give you a book, and that book pretty much tells you that if you go to certain pylons with a certain combination of crystals, you can get some consumables out of that. Now, thanks to our friend Althras here on the Classic DB, he took the time to tell us what you can get from each pylon, and the one that we are looking for is the eastern pylon. So to get 6 Crystal Spire, you need 10 yellow and 10 blue crystals. And then if you turn in different combinations at other pylons, you can get a spirit buff, grenades, instant health, and an armor buff or debuff. Another consumable that you can be using is Oil of Immolation, which is a mid-tier recipe of alchemy. It's very cool because it deals damage to everybody around you, and it will deal 250 damage in total, so 5 hits of 50 fire damage. So very cool and easy to craft and not all that expensive to craft as well. Now, the third consumable on our list is one that is well known amongst tanks, and it's the Dragon Breath Chili. Occasionally belches flame at the enemies struck in melee for the next 10 minutes. Other consumables that you can get are Elixir of Greater Intellect and then the Scroll of Intellect. What is cool about the potions and the scrolls, even though they give you the same stats, they can stack together. If you are lacking a certain specific stat, you can use both the Elixir and the Scroll together to fill in the gap. You can also get the Elixir of Giants and the Scroll of Strength, Elixir of Greater Agility and the Scroll of Agility, Arcane Elixir for some nice spell power, Elixir of Greater Defense and the Scroll of Armor, Elixir of Fortitude and the Scroll of Stamina, Scroll of Spirit, and last but definitely not least, Thorium Shield Spike. Now this is the only, I know it's an enchant, but this is the only enchant that is mandatory in the whole build, because when we went over the gear section, you saw that the gears were not enchanted. It's because the gears don't need to be enchanted to make the build work, but if you want to go ahead, definitely do it, or if you already have enchants on your gears, that's even better. But Thorium Shield Spike is the only one that is mandatory, and that's why I put it in this list. Now let's get into the gameplay aspect. So I have 10 steps here for you to follow. So first one, make sure you're all buffed up, make sure you have Blessing of Sanctuary, make sure that Retribution is on as well, and use all of your trinkets and miscellaneous items that will give you a buff before you get into combat. So let's say your Heart of the Scale or your Gigaflux Helm, for example. Then use also all of your scrolls, your potions, and if you have friends or other players around you, ask them if you can get one of their buffs, such as the Arcane Brilliance, Prayer of Fortitude, etc. Then, step 2, mount up and gather as much NPCs as you can handle. Like we've been saying many times during this guide, 5 to 10 should be what you typically aim for. Now, step 3, once they are all gathered up, drop a max rank consecration on the ground. And step 4, use a Seal of Light or Seal of Wisdom, and use a Judgment on the target that has to die first to apply a Judgment of Light or Judgment of Wisdom, depending on what you realize that you need more. If it's health, Seal of Light. If it's mana, Seal of Wisdom, obviously. Then step 5, reapply another seal. This time it can be, again, Seal of Light or Seal of Wisdom, or a Seal of Righteousness. Then step 6, it's going to use your unused trinkets, such as your Rammstein's Lightning Bolts, and consumables if needed, such as an Oil of Immolation. Then step 7, heal if necessary. If you are fighting 5 to 7 mobs, you shouldn't need to switch to Concentration Aura, but if you're fighting more than that, 7 to 10 or maybe a little bit more, you will probably need to switch to Concentration Aura that way, because you're going to take a lot of pushback otherwise. Then step 8 is to reapply your seals and your judgments as needed. This is what you will be doing all the time throughout the fights. Then step 9 is going to drink and eat after each pull. And then step 10,
rinse and repeat.
There you go. So these are the 10 easy steps that you can follow to make this build work like a charm. Alright, so now let's go over some grinding spots that you can go to with this build. So you'll want to focus on areas with a lot of melee NPCs, obviously, as you want to maximize the efficiency of your Blessing of Sanctuary. Blessing of Sanctuary is great against multiple smaller hits, like we've been saying all this guide, but spells take much longer to cast and hit you way harder. So if you pull casters along with melee NPCs, what's going to happen is that all the melee NPCs are going to follow you and stay in melee range, but the casters will cast from afar and will only get in melee range once they have run out of mana. So to save you some time, I made a list of some great farming spots for you. So we'll start in the Western Plagueland, and just for the sake of comparison, I have spots that are very nice, some others that are quite nice, and one that is very, I don't want to say bad, but it's one that you should go to only if all else fails, and if you really don't have anywhere else to go because everything else is contested. So the first one, with only one little smiley face, is the Weeping Cave. What can you expect to fight there? Rotting behemoths, decaying horrors, and the husk, which is a rare. And what can you get? Gold, Heart of the Wild, Major Healing Potion, and Living Essence is what you will get most of the time. And that's the most important loot. Obviously, you can get some other stuff that are quite bad. And the problem with this grinding spot is that it's quite a small cave. I mean, it's a cave, so you can grind there quite peacefully because it's not a very well-known zone and there's not a lot of things to do there. So you will be able to grind quite peacefully, but I mean, to get there, you need to go through quite a lot of slime NPCs, and we all know that those drop very shitty loot. I mean, they can drop the oozing bag, but I think it's like less than 5% chance to drop, so it's really bad loot. And on top of that, if you go there for some gold per hour, you will be very disappointed. But still, I just wanted to give you an idea of what's the one little smiley face grinding spot. And then not too far from the Weeping Cave is the Northridge Lumber Camp, which is a 2 smiley face grinding spot. What will you be facing there? Scarlet Lumberjack and also Scarlet Knights, but you want to avoid those Knights as much as possible because they have a very nasty knockdown that it will hurt your efficiency. But the Lumberjacks are very easy to fight, and there are quite a lot of those in this area. And what can you expect to get from this spot? Gold, lots of Mage Weave, some Rune Cloth, and Major Healing Potion. And the NPCs there are quite easy to fight, so That is why there's 2 smiley face for this. One spot that is 3 smiley face, which is where you will want to grind most of the time, is Sorrow Hill. What will you face there? Slavering Ghoul and Skeletal Flayers. What can you expect to get there? Gold, Rune Cloth, Major Healing Potion, and a lot of items for your Argent Dawn rep. Scourge Stones, Bone Fragments, Osseous, Agitator, and Somatic Intensifier. It's so good that it's 3 smiley faces, but I mean, if it could be 4, it would be 4, but it would be brought down to 3 smiley face because it's heavily contested, obviously. It's right beside Chillwind Camp, so there might be other Alliance players that will be grinding there, and it's also very close to Tirisfal Glade and the Bulwark, so obviously the Horde will also be willing to go there, and it's a very easy grinding spot, especially for your Argent Dawn reputation, so it's going to be heavily contested, but if you are lucky during the downtime in the servers or during the hours where there's not as much players, obviously you can go there, but expect to be ganked or expect other players to also want of your faction to also want to farm there. But other than that, a great grinding spot. Another very cool grinding spot is the Dalson's Tier, which is again 3 smiley faces. What can you expect to fight there? Skeletal Terrors, Blighted Zombies, and Rotting Cadavers. What can you expect to get? Gold, Rune Cloth, Major Healing Potion, and other items for your Argent Dawn rep, Scourge Stone, Somatic Intensifier, and Osseous Agitator. Now, out of all the little farmstead in Western Plagueland, this is by far the best. The other one are rather cancerous because the type of enemies that you will fight there are very bad, especially for a build that is built around AoE farming. If it was really like a blow up build where you just blow up one target after the other, then would probably be better. But all the other farmstead, I would say just ignore them because you will not get a lot of ROI for the time invested. And there again, you can get a lot of gold, Rune Cloth, Major Healing Potion, and Argent Dawn reputation items. Now we will go to the completely opposite end of the world in Silithus, to the southwestern part of the world in the Crystal Vale. Now, 2 smiley face and a half. What can you expect to fight there? Desert Rumblers and Desert Stormers. Why is it only 2.5 smiley face and not 3? Well, that's because the Desert Rumblers and the Stormers are quite high level compared to you. They are about 58 to 60, so you won't be able to kill as many in the same amount of time, but they will still drop some very nice loot. So what can you expect to get there? Gold, Core of Element, Solid Stone, Deep Rock Salt, and then Elemental Earth, Core of Earth, and Essence of Earth from the Desert Rumblers, and from the Desert Stormers, Elemental Air, Breath of Wind, and Essence of Air. Just a last note, be careful when you are pulling a few Desert Stormers because they can use their Thunderstorm AoE ability where you are standing that can deal low-key a lot of damage if you're not being careful, so just be sure to be careful when you're pulling those. Alright, so now we get to the north of Kalimdor and to Felwood, and you will see that this is a very nice zone because there's quite a few grinding spots that are very good for this build. So, Deadwood Village, 2 smiley faces, Deadwood Gardeners and Deadwood Warriors are what you will want to farm effectively, and just be careful of Deadwood Pathfinders that are range NPCs. So what can you expect to get there? Gold, Corrupted Soul Shard for cleansing the Felwood Flowers, Mage Weave Cloth, and then Deadwood Headdress Feather for your Timber Mahol rep. Jade Fire Gland is another nice grinding spot, 2 smiley faces, and you can face a lot of Jade Fire Satyr there, but be careful of the Jade Fire Felsworn, which are kind of warlocks and they attack you with Shadow Bolt and stuff like that. If you are fighting ranged opponents like that, just make sure that you bring all the other melees to the casters, and even if he casts you in melee range, well, at least you can attack everybody at the same time. He won't be far away and not taking damage until he gets into melee range. So again, you can get gold, Corrupted Soul Shards, Mage Weave Cloth, Demonic Runes, and Fell Claw. These are quite important and you can make quite a lot of gold with those. And just for the Demonic Rune, this is going to be obviously important for you if ever you want to do some raiding. And now Runes of Constellas, which is another 2 smiley face grinding spot. You will face Jadefire Rogues and Jadefire Shadowstalker, but again, be careful of the Felsworn. What can you get there? Pretty much the same thing that you can get from a Jadefire Glen, but on top of that, you can also get some Rune Cloth. So, very nice. Felpaw Village, another 2 smiley face grinding spot. Be sure to only attack Deadwood Avengers and Deadwood Den Watchers, and make sure to avoid Deadwood Shamans as much as possible because they are casters, but it can also heal their friendly targets and themselves, so I mean, if you have too many at the same time, you will just spend a lot of time attacking the same mobs that keep healing themselves. What can you expect to get? Gold, corrupted soul shard again, rune cloth, major healing potion, and deadwood headdress feathers for your timber maw hole rep. A grinding spot that I discovered that I didn't know was so nice before I did this video is the Iron Tree Woods. 3 smiley faces. Why? Because you will face Iron Tree Stompers, Iron Tree Wanderers, Toxic Horrors, and Iron Beak Screechers notably. What can you get from that spot? Quite a lot of interesting items. Gold, corrupted soul shard, heart of the wild, major healing potions, globe of water, essence of water, and elemental water from the water elementals, iron feather from the iron beak screechers, along with some giant egg for your cooking recipes. And iron feathers are crafting resources, if I'm not mistaken, for the leather workers. And you can also get some very nice Argent Dawn reputation items such as Savage Rond and Core of Elements, which is obviously very cool, and also Dark Moon Fair reputation item such as the Vibrant Plume. So this is a very nice grinding spot. Mobs are not too far apart so that you can constantly pull 4 to like 7 to 8 at the same time, which is what you want to aim for most of the time. So now we go with the last grinding spot because I don't want to tell you every single grinding spot that you can go to. You will probably find the ones that work better for you. But now we go through the Timber Maw Hold to Winter Spring to the Timber Maw Post. 2 smiley faces. You will face Winterfall Totemic, Winterfall Den Watchers, and Winterfall Pathfinders. And what can you expect to get? Gold, Rune Cloth, Winterfall Echo, Winterfall Firewater, Major Healing Potion, and Winterfall Spirit Beads for your Timber Maw Hole reputation. Alright, so we are already at the end of this guide, and I wanted to take some time to give you a little analysis of this build. So it was a lot of fun to play, and I must say that the results are quite surprising. I never thought to have this amount of success with such a build. Now, it won't turn you into an AoE farming monster that will be able to outclass mages, for example, but it's still able to pull its own weight. It is also rather easy to get started with, but I would personally advise you to wait until you have more gears to make it easier on you. Your tier 2 set is extremely versatile, which is why I advise you to wait. If you don't like the playstyle, for example, you can easily switch back to your healing spec or any other spec, and most of your gears will still be suited for the job, so use this to your advantage. If you're super excited to try this new build, then I definitely encourage you, but I think that with more gears, you will be able to maximize your time and effort, and you will put the odds in your favor if ever you are ganked. But I strongly advise you to try it if you play on a PvE server, as this is the best case scenario. You don't have to worry about players of the other faction ganking you, and you can focus all of your attention on efficiency. Just be aware that the server that I was on during my testing had a rather low population, so if you play on a popular server, it might be difficult to farm peacefully without members of either faction messing up your vibe. And what really motivated me to make this guide was the stigma that it is still around the Paladin class that says that they are only good for healing or for dispensing buff. And I think that this is a very narrow point of view, as you can do so much more if you have the right gears and if you have the will to try something new and think outside the box. Being a hybrid class has its downsides, yes, but it also has its upside, and I think that it's better to focus on that rather than on the negative. And if you made it this far in this guide, you're super awesome. Thank you very much. And I hope that you've enjoyed this new way to play the Paladin, and you have all the tools here to help you succeed if ever you want to try this build. So until next time, guys, hopefully sooner this time.
Have a good one.
And stay blessed.